Okay, gonna take a brief break from the poetry series and do a short story. But this one is basically an autobiography, but it's vaguely wrapped in like fiction. Yeah, it's kind of like it's a short story, but it's heavily drawn from my own real life experience. So, you know, maybe you guys will like it. I hope you do. And if you want me to continue it because I wrote this story um, about 4 years ago, September 5th, 2016. So obviously there's a whole new chapter to add into it because I only wrote up to what had happened then. So if you guys want me to continue the story with what's happened in the 4 years since, just let me know in the comments. And, don't forget to hit that button so you can see when new videos drop, and maybe follow me on my socials, Instagram, Twitter, and yeah, hope you enjoy the story.
I'm gonna get my bricks out in the sticks, bit by bit. I'm gonna build my house in the wildest sticks.
So, the boy. There was once a small boy who lived in a small city. His name and that of the city are unimportant. What matters is the boy and his struggle. For you see, he was no ordinary boy. This boy had been born a girl, or so the doctors said. And what did they know? You can't really tell somebody's gender from their body, and no one really asked the boy, not that he could have answered being newborn and all. The doctor's mistake didn't really become clear until later, when the boy began walking and talking. He took to coloring because it was deemed okay for girls, but a lot more amusing than playing with dolls or dresses. Outside was good too, since everybody was allowed to go outside, boys and girls. However, there was rough times, like all the many fights over girly costumes for Halloween, wanting short hair, being forced to wear dresses and skirts, and much more. There was also the issue of the boy's unladylike fondness for boy toys and activities. You see, his parents falsely believed they had a little girl and really expected the boy to act like one. As he grew, he went to live with his grandmother, and she was less strict about the girly stuff, allowing him to have short hair and boyish clothing. But she too saw him as her granddaughter, and despite accepting the boy's masculine nature, she still expected him to be a girl. More time passed, and he began noticing girls. This would be normal if he hadn't also developed breasts and a menstrual cycle. All these changes and unnatural thoughts were too much. He tried to kill himself. He was only 12. What he learned is, 1, that's not as easy as it seems, and 2, his thoughts were in fact perfectly normal. It was just his body that had been wrong. But how could he tell people what he felt? He had only ever heard of boys dressing like girls, like RuPaul and other drag queens. He didn't really know it could go the other way, or that anybody like him existed. So, he pushed it aside and called himself a lesbian. He was 14 at that time, and really thought it was just easier. People saw him as a girl anyway. Why explain how he felt like the ghost of a boy possessing a girl's body? Somehow, he kept that charade up for another 5 years. He dated a lot of real lesbians, and who enjoyed being women. However, the label began feeling wrong because he really didn't enjoy being a woman. This led to plenty of teen angst, identity, and existential crisis, as well as several more suicide attempts. Oh, and there was also his brief affair with barbiturates and alcohol, although that ended quickly once he realized the impact his addictions had upon his grandmother. He didn't care if he was hurting himself, but what kind of guy could really hurt his grandma and not feel bad, especially if she had raised him? After that, he tried to pull his shit together. He tried, but didn't succeed. He dropped out of school and left his grandmother's. By this point, he was 18 and only really a few months from graduating. Quickly realizing his mistake, it only took 6 months, and he returned to school that fall. At this point, he was no longer living at home, but he was still known as a woman. He enjoyed the new freedom he had found, but he still felt caged in his body. After a year one filled with drugs, alcohol, sex, and freedom, the boy did some soul searching. He began doing research online and discovered there are actually thousands of guys just like him. By now he had completed his high school credits, but opted to stay a little bit longer. He was only 19, he had just figured out who he was, and it's not surprising he had no idea what he wanted to even do yet. It was also at this point that he came out publicly, telling his family and friends what he had kept hidden for so long. Most were accepting, including school staff who gladly used his new name and chosen pronouns. Since then, he has lived openly as a man, finally freed from the charade of femininity that he was playing. Finally freed from the typecast role thrust upon him at birth by clueless doctors. Although he quickly learned his new freedom came with new obstacles. Simple things, like using a public washroom, presented new dilemmas. For example, women screaming at him or men attacking him, both of which are possibilities and have become reality for the boy. Then, there's a problem of first impressions. Most people base their impression on appearance. Being called a girl repeatedly can become a bit emasculating after a while. Worse though, he discovered people people would use his biology against him, like one ex to whom he'd actually been engaged, who was fond of telling him he looked like a Renaissance painting. Not only did she mock his curves for being feminine, but also his voice. These things did hurt very much. These things hurt so much more simply because of who was saying them. She crippled his confidence. He stopped singing and taking pride in his appearance. It was painful for him to think about. She had once made him feel like such a real man, but in time she began viewing him as nothing more than a fat chick. It took him months to recover. He obsessed over losing weight and looking more manly. He did sit-ups, lifted weights, stopped overeating, and began walking everywhere. He even began doing vocal exercises in an attempt to deepen his voice, and found some hair growth shampoo to try and get a beard, which worked a little bit, but not much. Then one day, it hit him. He was a man. Not his body, or his clothing, or even his hobbies, just him. He was. He didn't need to prove it to anyone but himself. And that, my friends, is the day our boy's life truly began. So,
Bit by bit, I'm gonna give my brick.
So, yeah, basically that's a very vague description of how I grew up. I kind of wrote it in a short story. I was going through a really hard breakup back then. I was still a couple months out of it, still really fixated. Like, I'd spent 4 years with almost 4 years with the same girl, was engaged, we broke up. It was it wasn't like a rough, like, big fight, blow up. It was just rough. Like, it was a very emotional, like, it was emotionally devastating. And I think more so because typically in my teens I was always the one doing the dumping. So I had actually, like, gotten really close to somebody, and it was the first time I ever got dumped, and I was not prepared for that. And, you know, I'll never tell somebody just get over it again, because I get it. After going through that, I get it. Those people, when you need 6 months to just cry and mourn and look at old pictures and, like, swear and yell at the freaking wall while you listen to angry music, I get it. Do it. You'll get over it, but take your time. I've been there. So it's like, that story was part of my coping, and I just kind of wrote my whole... And this was also a year before I started hormones. So I'd been living openly out as male for about four or 5 years at that point. And I hadn't started testosterone. I couldn't bind. I still can't bind, and I don't want to anymore. But at the time, it was something that made me uncomfortable, that I couldn't do it, but it caused real pain and breathing issues. So, you know, a flat chest is not worth dying over. And surgery didn't really seem like an option at the time, and like I was just stubborn, didn't want to go on hormones because I was afraid and like stubborn, and the information I knew about them didn't really have much to do with pre-existing conditions like mental health issues, so I was really scared that if I went on hormones it would make me worse. So it's like, yeah, I was not in a great place, but at the same time, at the end of the story, it's like, yeah, I kind of came to a good idea, like a good place. My story was beginning, like, starting out on my own, making my own identity. I'd never really been single for any prolonged period as an adult, so it was like, I was 23, and really making my first single foray into the world. For the first few years of my early adulthood, I'd always had a roommate, or close friends, or family, or a steady relationship to rely on. Well, after that, I was living in a town by myself, a little bit away from my family. I was single. I had to find a new job. It was the first time I actually was on my own. Like, I wasn't 100% on my own. I could always ask my family for help, but it's not like they could be there in an instant either. You know, I might have to wait a couple days to see them, or I might have to wait for a couple hours till they can get on the computer to send me money, or like, you know. So it was the first time I actually kind of didn't have as much of that security net, and it was scary, but in the long run, it was probably the best thing that's ever happened to me. So yeah, just let me know if you want to hear, if you want me to try and continue the story. I haven't really written much in a while, but, you know, if people want to hear it, I could really try and write something and try and get the juices flowing again. But anyway, make sure to stay tuned for that end screen to see my social media accounts, and subscribe down below, and ring the bell if you want to see the next video, because this is the second one today. You never know when you're going to get one of these, where you get a double, a twofer. Or you might get, like, the last 3 days, nothing. That's why I say ring the bell. I work on schizophrenic time, which is like, there is no time zone for schizophrenia. Sometimes you're on time, sometimes you're out of time, sometimes you don't even know what day it is. Forget about knowing where I am, when am I? You know? So, stay tuned, and click those buttons.
Maybe just a good book and a heart to break. I'll make a mistress of a little Wiccan thing.